HO wants $3.2 million from me over a flood. But the river isn't even mine. For my entire existence, I've been a resident of this valley, my life inextricably linked to the flow of Ash Creek. Its currents have bordered our family's property since before this territory was officially recognized as a state, and we've coexisted with it as good neighbors should. We never attempted to control it or claim dominion over it. Instead, we lived alongside it, worked alongside it, and observed its rhythmic swelling and receding with the changing seasons, just as my ancestors did. So, when the prolonged, storm-laden spring arrived, with its continuous overcast skies and distant rumbling, I remained unconcerned. I had witnessed the creek's rise countless times and understood its rhythms. Nevertheless, I wasn't careless. Each morning, I inspected the banks, walked the perimeter, and ensured the livestock weren't wandering too close. The low-lying field by the southern boundary became a bit waterlogged, but there was no cause for alarm. I fortified the old diversion barrier near the orchard, patched areas with earth-filled sacks, and confirmed every channel on my side was unobstructed. Water naturally seeks its path, the key is not to impede it. By the end of the second week, a palpable tension hung in the air, a coiled energy that seemed ready to release. And it did. A massive tempest descended overnight, unleashing an almost biblical deluge across the entire basin. At dawn, Ash Creek breached its boundaries, carving a destructive path through the floodplain. Yet, my land was untouched. The current swept past, veering south, and slammed directly into clear river meadows. I had a history with that community. 5 years prior, their homeowners association had tried to sue me, claiming the sound of my farm equipment at 5:30 in the morning constituted noise pollution, an affront to their refined suburban sensibilities. I prevailed in court, demonstrating their regulations held no sway over my property, and that my machinery had been rousing livestock long before their pretentious, Mediterranean-style homes were built downstream. Since then, a silent animosity had prevailed, so I felt no remorse upon hearing the news of the damage. 5 residences inundated, their decorative entryway destroyed, roads undermined, and power transformers blown. A true disaster. But it wasn't my doing. I was certain of that. 3 days later, as I was repairing a gate latch on the East Corral, I heard the sound of tires on the gravel road. I looked up to see a man in a formal suit exiting a luxury sedan, carrying a leather folio as if it were a fragile artifact. Wiping my hands on a rag, I approached him. "Mr. Hogard," he asked with a voice full of professional, manufactured concern. "That's me," I replied, squinting in the sunlight. "I'm here on behalf of the Clear River Meadows Homeowners Association. I've been asked to deliver a formal notification of a claim." He opened the folio and handed me a heavy envelope. I tore it open, almost chuckling at what I found inside. A printed check made out to the Clear River Meadows Homeowners Association for the sum of $3,200,000. My eyebrows shot up. "Is this a prank?" I asked. "It's a formal request for restitution," he stated. "The association holds you accountable for the recent flood damage, asserting that your failure to maintain proper water control on your section of Ash Creek contributed significantly to the destruction downstream." I paused, then broke into a loud, genuine laugh that caused the man to flinch. "You've truly lost your minds," I said. "Do you think I'm responsible for the river? The association has determined," he said carefully, "that your land encompasses the section of Ash Creek where the initial bank failure occurred. As such, you may be held liable for damages under common riparian law." I stared at him, then took the check, folded it in half, and put it in my back pocket. "Tell your employers they'll need a more convincing argument than that," I said. "There's also a waiver included," he added quickly. "If you sign the agreement and submit the payment within 15 business days, the HO will forego further legal action." I nodded slowly, still in disbelief. "And if I don't?" I asked. "Then the association intends to pursue litigation," he said, his tone devoid of emotion, simply stating a procedural fact. I watched him drive away, leaving a faint cloud of dust. Returning to my porch, I sat on the steps, the envelope still warm in my hand, The air carried the scent of wet foliage and old rain. In the distance, Ash Creek murmured softly, its waters still high but slowly receding. They were targeting me again. But this time it wasn't about sound or exhaust fumes. This time, they wanted compensation for a natural disaster, for a river I didn't own, and somehow, they had decided I was to blame. Chapter 2. When people attempt to extort millions. You'd think they'd have the decency to wait for a response, but not the residents of Clear River Meadows, not with Karen Winters at the helm. That woman operates under the assumption that the only worthwhile sound is her own echo. I barely finished reading the claim before the public campaign began. It was loud, self-righteous, and unrelenting. First came the science. Large, red vinyl banners were strung across the HOA's brick entrance, declaring, "Pay for the flood, Mr. Hogard, and accountability starts upstream." I saw them on my way to get supplies and couldn't help but laugh. Karen must have ordered them within hours of delivering that notice. She wasted no time in mobilizing public opinion. Then came the newspaper article, a column on page 2 of the Valley Ledger, written by Karen Winters herself, was titled, "When Nature Strikes, Responsibility Matters." It was a piece filled with thinly veiled accusations and legal jargon, claiming I had failed to implement proper water management and ignored years of hydrological standards. She even accused me of jeopardizing public safety, as if I were a careless bureaucrat neglecting my duties. It would have been comical if it hadn't been so meticulously planned. I started receiving strange looks at the supply store. Friendly nods turned into awkward glances. Conversations about the livestock dried up. People love a convenient villain, especially when it provides a source of local gossip. I didn't blame them. Karen was simply better at public relations than I was at being a recluse. Next, the talk of a class action lawsuit began. A friend of mine, Tom Delaney, who lived in Clear River Meadows, gave me a warning. He said Karen had convened an emergency meeting, rousing a crowd of angry residents, some still dealing with flooded basements, and encouraged them to sue me as a group. Tom said the room was divided. Half the people just wanted their homes repaired, while the other half were ready to make effigy of me. That's when I contacted Julian Brantley. Julian isn't just an attorney, he's a strategic mind, a man who carries himself with a smile that says, "Go on, try me." He was the same lawyer who got the hoe off my back 5 years ago. He dismantled them in court with surgical precision. He didn't hesitate when I explained the situation. "They're trying to pin riparian liability on you for a flood?" he asked, and I could practically hear the gears turning in his head. "Yes," I said. "They're claiming I'm responsible for a river." "Excellent," he murmured. "Send me the letter, the check, the article, everything, and I'll submit a request to the Wyoming Department of Water Resources before noon." He was true to his word. 3 days later, the paperwork arrived. The department confirmed that the bed of Ash Creek is state property, designated as a non-navigable but public waterway. My land includes a narrow buffer zone, but the river itself is not mine. I have a registered agreement that permits livestock watering and limited bank maintenance, and that's all. I couldn't construct a dam even if I wanted to. The state would penalize me faster than Karen could print another banner. So, to summarize, I don't own the river, I can't control it, and I didn't alter or neglect any dam. This left a crucial question. What exactly was I being sued for? Julian's email provided the answer. "They're bluffing, Daniel. They think they can intimidate you into giving up before we get to court. It's a PR stunt with a flimsy legal foundation." I almost had it framed, but winning wasn't enough for me. I wanted to set the record straight. So, I drafted my own statement. No legal jargon, no threats, just the unvarnished truth. One posted it online, printed a few hundred copies, and distributed them at the town hall, the feed store, and the gas station. It read, "I am not affiliated with Clear River Meadows. I do not own Ash Creek. I have not altered the river in any way. I will not be paying $3 million for a natural disaster that had nothing to do with me. I will, however, defend myself and my land with every legal means at my disposal. If you want the truth, I'll be here. The same place I've always been. It didn't stop Karen's campaign, but it made people think. Scowls turned into second glances. A note was left on my truck windshield in the grocery store parking lot. No name, just 6 shaky words. We believe you. Don't back down. I kept it, because I had no intention of backing down. Not for a river that was never mine to begin with. Chapter 3 defense can only get you so far. You build barriers, provide explanations, and present evidence. But when someone throws stones at you long enough, you eventually stop ducking and start throwing them back. That's where I was. No more polite messages. No more silence. Karen wanted a confrontation, and I was ready to give her one. This time, I was going to strike first. I started with the local press, not the polished city reporters. I contacted the journalists who had covered things like cattle births and tractor parades. They were people who understood the land and the community, and more importantly, they knew me. I invited them to come see the farm, not just the scenic parts, but the crucial areas they needed to understand. They arrived with their cameras and notepads. I walked them along the creek, pointing out the exact boundary of my land, showing them the flood markers and the untouched soil. Then I took them to the old dam. My dam, a relic from my grandfather's era, reinforced with sandbags, still standing firm. Not a single crack or breach, just a testament to rock and grit doing its job. Then I showed them the topographical map, where Ash Creek makes a sharp turn and flows directly into a neighborhood that should never have been built there. Look here, I said, pointing to a shaded area, seasonal floodplain. I explained that the term was from the state's hydrology maps, and they built homes on it. I continued. They altered the bank, narrowed the channel, and paved over the wetland buffer. You want to know why the water didn't stay in the creek? Because they gave it nowhere to go. That got their attention. But I wasn't finished. I hired an independent hydrologist named Mara Simons. She was sharp, direct, and more precise than a surgical instrument. She took samples, ran computer models, and analyzed drone footage and elevation maps. A week later, I had a 42-page report in my hands, with charts, photos, and a bold conclusion: primary cause of structural flood damage, unpermitted alteration of the riparian zone, and negligent failure to reinforce key erosion points in the development known as Clear River Meadows. I could have hugged her, but the final piece of evidence came from Julian. While examining the HOA's records, he discovered something incredible. 2 months before the flood, the association had voted to cancel a contract for shoreline reinforcement. Budgetary concerns, they claimed, and Karen had personally signed off on it. No public announcement, no meeting minutes, just a quiet decision and a shrug. So, to summarize again, they modified the landscape, ignored state regulations, cancelled safety measures, and then tried to blame me for the resulting disaster. At that point, I wasn't just angry, I was deeply insulted. I sent Karen a certified letter, simple and to the point. Your continued public claims constitute defamation. Your actions, including the false attribution of legal liability and the use of fabricated ownership claims, are being reviewed for civil counteraction. This is not a bluff. I attached a copy of Mara's report and carbon copied every major news outlet in the state. The next day, Julian filed a counterclaim, citing defamation, harassment, and malicious prosecution. We sought $1 million in damages and a court order to stop the HOA smear campaign. The paperwork was clean, forceful, and irrefutable. But fate had one more surprise in store for us. A man named Harold Vince called Julian's office, a former HOA board member who had resigned the previous year. He said he had information that might be useful. We met at a local diner. He looked exhausted, like a man burdened by someone else's mistakes. Over coffee, he revealed that Karen had ignored multiple warnings from the HOA's own engineering consultants about shoreline erosion. She had dismissed a contractor who flagged the retaining walls as an urgent concern. She refused to file the paperwork for state floodplain grants, and she made sure no one else could discuss it. She told us it was all fear-mongering, he said. The HOA couldn't afford another big project before the upcoming election. I sat back, My jaw clenched. She gambled with the entire neighborhood to win another term. He didn't confirm, but he didn't have to. Before leaving, he gave me a USB drive. Meeting recordings, he said. You didn't get them from me. That night, I listened to every single one. And there she was, Karen Winters, her voice as cold as winter, saying, if we get through spring without an issue, no one will care about the river. It's just a matter of public perception. We need that money for the landscaping project. She gambled. She lost. And now she wanted me to foot the bill. Not anymore. Chapter 4. I've been in court before, but nothing like this. This wasn't a disagreement over property lines or who maintained a drainage ditch. This was a full-blown war, with legal documents instead of weapons, and Karen Winters leading her hoe like she was a general storming the battlefield. It started with the summons. Julian called one morning, his voice sharper than usual. They filed, he said. Official class action lawsuit. Damages set at $3.2 million. For what? I asked. Negligence, public nuisance, failure to prevent flood damage, mismanagement of natural resources. He rattled off, as if I own them. He sighed. Do you think logic has anything to do with this? I arrived at the courthouse in my work boots and a clean button-down shirt, a deliberate act of defiance. Karen showed up with 2 lawyers, 3 binders of documents, and a small army of homeowners, many of whom looked like they'd never seen a muddy field. One woman, wearing a neck brace, kept giving me accusatory looks, as if I had personally pushed her into the creek. The judge, a sharp-eyed woman named Melanie Groves, seemed unimpressed by both sides. She glanced at the pile of paperwork, sighed, and said, let's begin. Karen's lawyers started with a strong presentation. They brought out maps, damage assessments, and aerial photos of the flood. They argued that the initial breach had occurred near my property, and that I could have prevented the damage with a modern water management system. Julian didn't react. He waited for them to finish their presentation, then stood up and calmly presented a series of documents to the judge. State waterway classifications, my easement agreement, satellite images, and Mara's hydrology report. For the next 20 minutes, he dismantled their case piece by piece. He pointed out that Ash Creek is a state-managed waterway, not a private one, and I had no authority to build dams. He showed that the HOA had illegally altered the riparian buffer. He proved that the damage occurred entirely downstream, with no obstruction on my land. Then he presented the critical piece of evidence, the document showing that the HOA, under Karen's direction, had cancelled a planned shoreline reinforcement project. Karen shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Julian continued, presenting Mara's report, which showed how the HOA's landscaping had constricted the natural floodplain, redirecting water toward their homes. He even produced building permits that showed 3 of the 5 damaged houses were built in a seasonal flood risk zone. By the time he finished, the courtroom was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Then came the absurd defense. Karen's lawyers tried to argue that even if I didn't own the river, I had a moral obligation to the land. Julian laughed. Your Honor, he said, if moral obligation is the new standard for liability, half the state should be on trial for bad weather. The judge didn't laugh, but her raised eyebrow said everything. Karen looked pale, her grip on her pen white-knuckled. Her supporters behind her were no longer so loyal. Some were whispering among themselves. One person even walked out before recess. After lunch, things got worse for them. Julian played one of Harold's audio recordings. Karen's voice was clear. If we get through spring without an issue, no one will care about the river. It's just a matter of public perception. The silence that followed was deafening. Karen tried to speak, but her lawyer pulled her sleeve. The judge leaned forward and said, Ms. Winters, I advise you to remain silent. The implied "for now" was loud and clear. By the end of the day, Judge Groves issued a preliminary order. The HOA's case would continue, but she warned them that their own liability would be fully investigated. She granted our counterclaim and ordered the HOA to submit 2 years of internal communications and financial records. Karen didn't even look at me as she left. Her jaw was clenched so tight I thought it might shatter. I stood outside, the sun glinting off my truck's hood. Julian lit a cigarette. He only smokes before or after significant events. He grinned. "It's not over," he said, "but we just won the first round." Chapter 5 courtrooms are designed to strip people bare. Some endure it and emerge stronger, while others crumble under the scrutiny. By the third week of hearings, Karen Winters was visibly deteriorating. We were in the evidentiary phase, which meant documents, emails, and sworn testimony. Julian was in his element. He could make a ghost confess to tax evasion. I just sat there, trying not to roll my eyes, and watched the whole thing fall apart for the other side. First on the stand was Mara, our hydrologist. She was impeccably dressed and spoke with an unshakable confidence. She explained that Ash Creek had behaved exactly as expected during the storm, using technical terms that made Karen's lawyers squirm. When asked if anything on my land had contributed to the flooding, she was unequivocal. Absolutely not. The upper banks were stable. Mr. Hogarth's maintenance of the natural buffers actually helped mitigate potential downstream surge. Then came the damning evidence. Julian presented topographical maps of clear river meadows before and after development, with the modifications highlighted in red. He pointed out where they had filled in wetlands, created ponds where floodwaters used to collect, and lined channels with rock to make them look like streams. Mara identified the weak points, where the water had been given nowhere to go. Could this damage have been prevented? Julian asked. Easily, Mara replied, if the HOA had followed basic floodplain construction guidelines. Karen didn't look up once, but the real blow came next. Julian called Harold Vince to the stand. He testified for over an hour, describing how Karen had manipulated votes, suppressed budget allocations, and silenced opposing board members. He confirmed the cancellation of the shoreline reinforcement project and explained how Karen had dismissed applications for state flood mitigation grants. The most damaging evidence, however, was the copies he had made, emails, budget drafts, and meeting transcripts. The most damning was a message from Karen to the HOA treasurer, dated just 6 weeks before the flood. If we delay the shoreline work until fall, she had written, we can move the funds toward the landscaping project. Less visible risk, more visible improvement. Trust me, this flood thing is a non-event. Julian let that statement hang in the air. Karen's lawyer tried to object, citing privileged internal communication, but the judge dismissed it. If a flood is a non-event, she said, why are we all sitting in this courtroom? Then came my favorite moment. Julian played a short video clip from a board meeting. Karen was on camera, smiling smugly, saying, Ash Creek is Danielle's problem until we figure out how to make it ours. The room was stunned. The HOA residents, who had once glared at me, now looked like they had swallowed their tongues. Karen's team was in disarray. They tried to blame the county for not maintaining the culverts, but the county engineer's affidavit showed that the flow had only exceeded capacity because of the HOA's landscaping. This wasn't just negligence, it was hubris disguised as community management. I was never asked to take the stand that day. Julian said, let their own words do the work, and they did. That evening, as we were leaving, a young couple from Clear River Meadows approached me. They looked ashamed. We just wanted to say we didn't know, the man said. We were told that you were the reason our home flooded. I nodded. You were told wrong. The woman looked embarrassed. If there's anything we can do. I didn't answer right away. Make sure this never happens again, I said. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about what happens when people believe they can defy nature, evade consequences, and blame someone who never participated in their game. Chapter 6. By the final week of the trial, the courthouse no longer felt hostile. Reporters had stopped trying to get quotes. I guess they figured I had already spoken my mind. The clerk at the front desk even started saving me a seat with a good view. Julian called it the tide turning. I called it gravity finally doing its job. The courtroom was packed. Residents, journalists, lawyers, and even a few people from a neighboring county who had heard the story of the farmer who defeated the HOA. I didn't dress up. Same worn boots, same coat, same expression. I wasn't there for appearances. Judge Groves called the court to order, and her tone made it clear she was done with the theatrics. Justice is served, she said. Her ruling was delivered in layers. First, the legal finding. The court finds that the plaintiff, Clear River Meadows Homeowners Association, failed to demonstrate direct or proximate liability on the part of the defendant, Mr. Daniel Hogard, regarding the flood damage incurred. The claim that Mr. Hogard is responsible for a public watercourse he neither owns nor controls is, at best, speculative and, at worst, a deliberate misrepresentation of state environmental statutes. Translation: you tried, Karen, and you failed. Then came the counterclaim. The court further finds that the plaintiff's actions, namely the dissemination of defamatory materials, the pursuit of knowingly baseless litigation, and the suppression of relevant internal communications, constitute a malicious abuse of legal process. She granted our motion, awarding damages of $950,000, $420,000 for reputational harm, and $530,000 for legal fees, investigation costs, and punitive damages. Karen's face was a mask of shock. Her lawyer stared at the floor. One of the HOA board members put his head in his hands. I heard someone in the back whisper, "Oh my God." But Judge Groves wasn't finished. She ordered the HOA to cease all public statements related to the case, submit to an independent financial audit, and appoint an interim administrator. As for Karen, she didn't walk out of the courthouse, she retreated. By that afternoon, the consequences were immediate. The Clear River Meadows Board held an emergency meeting, this time open to the entire community. Karen was removed by a unanimous vote. Residents demanded access to all records, budget decisions, and communication logs. The landscaping project she had funded was cancelled, and as the final blow, Karen was quietly dismissed from her job at the county legal office. They called it a conflict of interest and a breach of ethics, but whatever the reason, it was final. Julian, ever the professional, was smug for only a moment. "We're not suing anyone else unless they ask for it," he said. "But if you want to file a claim for emotional distress, I'm happy to send a postcard." The press had a field day. One headline read, "HOA hit with legal tsunami after targeting innocent farmer." Another simply said, "The flood that broke the HOA." But for me, the victory was in the quiet. The next day, I woke up at 5:30, started my tractor, and drove out to the east field. The air was crisp, the kind that invigorates you. And there, for the first time in weeks, was silence. No banners, no letters, no luxury cars driving up my driveway. Just me, the land, and Ash Creek, whispering quietly, free and unbothered. A month after the ruling, the only thing that flooded my land was joy. We held a fair, not a commercial one with rides, but a genuine Wyoming gathering. Tables under canvas tents, hay bales for seats, local bands with rusty guitars, and better voices than half the songs on the radio. We called it the Riparian Rights Revival. Julian came up with the name, and I wasn't about to argue with the man who had won me a small war. Neighbors came, some just curious, some grateful, and a few still drying out their basements. A few people from the HOA even showed up. One brought a pie. I gave a small speech, nothing formal, just standing on a wooden crate. I spoke about rivers, land, and what happens when bureaucracy forgets that nature doesn't read legal documents. I didn't mention Karen's name, but everyone knew who I meant when I said, "And if someone hands you a $3 million check for rainwater, maybe hand it back with a shovel and ask where they were when the sandbags were being filled." That got a big laugh. Julian grilled ribs. Mara drank lemonade. Even Harold showed up, wearing a loud Hawaiian shirt, looking like he had finally retired from horror-related trauma. Someone brought me a t-shirt that read, "I survived the flood and the HOA that followed." And I had.